What if the thing holding back justice isn't the lack of will, it's lack of access? Today's guest is doing something about that after coming up having a really rough time in high school, a near fatal car crash, a parent who believed in him endlessly. Don't discount that, folks. And ending up not only at Stanford Law, but with one of the most powerful mentors in the field of law.
So for those of you, like maybe Sarah, who have liked to tease lawyers for being miserable people, first of all, why? But second of all, with secret languages, this episode brings the absolute best in the field to rehabilitate that image. Although, I'd like to interject that, to be honest, the role of lawyers in holding the line during this Trump administration should have done that already for all of you. But anyway, so not only do we have the absolute best here to do that, but he's also going to infuse us with hope and humanity and remind us that even if we're not lawyers, there is a lot we each can do to make the world a better place.
You're listening to the podcast, What Do You Mean By That? And we're your co-hosts, Sara and me, Sasha.
Hey, everybody. Well, I'm super excited to be here with you as well. So I'm Luke Liss. I'm the pro bono partner at Wilson Sonsini based in Palo Alto.
You know, Sarah and I were writing this episode. I realized that I've known you, Luke, for basically 20 years, which was shocking to me. So I was like, how has it been 20 years? But it really also makes me deeply appreciate you and all of the work that you've done since first got to know you as a junior associate at Wilson Sonsini up until the present, right? And we're going to go through all of that. But I feel like the point at which I met you is still kind of like a midpoint in your story. I would love to talk a little bit about how you got to Wilson Sonsini. And in particular, Sarah's raising high schoolers. I've got an almost high schooler, also hard to believe. Can you and you talk about your challenges there, right? From high school to, big firm life. So maybe there's some hope to share in there for parents listening as well and how epiphanies matter. So you are a great storyteller. I would love to hear that part of your story.
Yeah, well, hopefully I can live up to it. And I got to say, too, it is crazy how time flies, 20 years. And I feel really lucky to have known you for that long, but it also doesn't really seem that long in some ways, right? Time is funny. I feel like COVID was such a strange time, and sometimes ways it went in a blink of an eye. Sometimes it took forever. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. So 20 years, I think, since I graduated from law school coming up in October. So I think for me, it is helpful to talk a little bit about background because it kind of informs a lot of what I do today and how I think about things. So essentially, I grew up in Oregon, Portland, Oregon. I am a kid of adoption. And so, Ms. Sasha, I've heard you talk a lot before about being the recognizable family in your neighborhood and in events and things like that. And that was definitely me growing up because I grew up in a mixed race family. My adopted mom is white. She's a huge part of my story. And so I had a lot of struggles when I was young, just in terms of identity, in terms of not knowing where I wanted to go in life, and just really kind of getting with some wrong crowds and not doing the things that I need to be doing. And so it was really a youth of a lot of twists and turns that didn't really turn around until I was in a really serious car accident, actually, when I was in about 19 years old. And that really kind of did spark epiphanies and started me really thinking about paths in life and kind of starting schooling after that. So up until that point, I was basically a high school dropout, a really poor student. And then I started at community college at Lane Community College in Oregon, transferred to U of O, and then ultimately ended up at Stanford Law School and then graduated from there, which is when I started at Wilson Sonsini.
I think, every time I hear your ground, I like that path is so amazing because I think a lot of people assume a lot of things about what is that path to Stanford Law.
Well, and I had a question about that because those epiphanies, you think about what it takes to sometimes shake up a life and sort of go, okay, look, we don't live forever. What are we going to do with our life? Could you share one insight you had? Like if you get into the brain, I'm thinking as a parent, how do you help your kid without them getting into scenarios like that?
It's an excellent question, and I'm not sure I have a great answer, but I can speak to my experience with that. I think I had to go through it over and over and over. And I think the thing for my mom was just her endless patience with me. There's so many points where she could have given up. And I think it's really hard with boys in particular, trying to just get them to act sensibly and kind of mature and act in ways that are productive. And I know for kids in general, there's so many pressures. Like I can't imagine now if I were dealing with social media as a young person and navigating that. But I think that really sticks out to me is just kind of the endless patience of my mom, and then people being there for me kind of throughout my youth when I really needed it and really kind of paying attention to that. And I think those were the types of things when I really had to sit still and for 3 months in the halo after the car accident and really think about and reflect on about how fleeting life really can be, which I think a lot of young people don't really get. And why would they? Everything feels like forever. Like, unlike now, a summer feels like an eternity. And so I think that kind of really sparked me, but I think it will also be different for everybody. And I think a lot of it is giving kids space to be who they are, trying to be patient, but trying to keep your sanity as well. So I think that's really important for people on the parenting side of things.
That's awesome. Thank you. No, it enforces that relationship part, the believing in you. Like we hear that, and it's such a good reminder. So thank you.
I think that was always something, even when I made it impossible, she would be frustrated. She would have moments. We would have our moments. We would have our arguments. But I always knew at the end of the day that she did believe in me. And that was something that really did kind of keep me from going all the way over the edge at certain points.
That's so important. And, you talk about people who were there for you, right? And I want to talk about, I kind of want to tie that to people who were there for you after that point, right? Because I know you talk about the power of having a mentor, having a sponsor, right? And I think, in my opinion, you had one of the best, right? In Harry Bremen. Can you talk about how you first met him, what his role was in shaping you as an attorney, and also like pushing for your success, I think, as an attorney, and better yet, sort of shaping you as an individual. And in particular, I love the graduation / like bar exam story because that one is so epic. So please share that as well.
Yeah, it is. And Harry is probably my favorite person to talk about. And it's also that story is a reminder that progress isn't always linear too. So it's not like I got through the struggles and got to Stanford and then everything was perfect. I still had a lot of rough edges to sort out still to this day. But Harry Bremond was one of the first Black attorneys in the California Bay Area. He joined Wilson Sonsini in, I think about 1967 when lawyers weren't getting hired. He went through struggles I couldn't even imagine. Graduating from law school, no one would hire him. It was really difficult for many years, but he always kept up a relentless optimism. So when I met him right around the time I was graduating from law school, or a year or so before that, when I was a summer associate, he really, went out of his way to be a mentor, not only to myself, to TJ, who's Miss Sasha's spouse, and who I also came up with, and we all knew each other when we were younger. And he was a mentor to both of us, and he'd spend time with us. He'd take us to lunch. He'd take us for TJ to get a haircut. Even then, I didn't have much in the way of hair. He would just really spend time with us and not kick us out of his office. And that meant a lot, I think, to both of us, because I know for me, I didn't have that role model growing up. And so I think the story that really sticks out in our early relationship was when I was graduating from law school, he showed up and I saw him there. And like all law students, I thought, wow, he's here to congratulate me, tell me how wonderful I am, and this is just great. But no, I was very wrong about that. He pointed at me and in his very signature way said, Luke, you better pass that bar. If you don't pass the bar, I'm going to kick your ass. And he repeated that about 3 times. And at first I was kind of laughing. I thought, oh, he's being funny. But it became very clear very quickly that he was not joking. And that really was the message I needed to hear in the blunt way I needed to hear it at the time, because I did get my butt in the library and studied and passed the bar. And that was just kind of the beginning of the relationship with Harry. And I think over the years, there were so many similar stories where he would mentor not only TJ and I, but many younger people from all different and diverse backgrounds. And that's one lesson he really left with me, is people don't need to look just like me for me to be a mentor or resource to them or to network with them. And I think one of the things that most sums up Harry and his life and his experience, which we could do a whole podcast on, is when TJ and I were having lunch with him at his 85th birthday a few years back, and he was telling stories. He was in rare form. And I remember just asking him, Harry, is there anything that you haven't seen? Is there anything you haven't experienced? Because it's like he has a story for everything. And he's really sat back and thought about it. And he finally said, with that signature glint in his eye, I've seen a lot. And I always remember him in that way because he, as you know, Miss Sasha, he passed at the age of 91 in December of this last year.
Wonderful that you had that person. When I think about having someone believe in you and deliver the message you need to have and continue to stay in your life for decades, right? And that sounds incredibly important. Like when people are thinking about developing mentors, maybe they're, they don't have the workplace structure or it is in the workplace. When you think about that, what should people how do you develop that relationship? What does a mentor do? What can a mentee expect? How does that happen?
So it's a really great question. I think one, you have to keep your eyes open and be open to it both ways. And so Harry is a really unique person. But I think one thing that is underrated about the legal profession generally is there's a lot of people out there who have a tremendous wealth of knowledge, and maybe it's in different niche ways, who are willing to share it. But I think one of the biggest keys is, as a mentee, being open to that and bringing something to the table yourself. So one of the things that I think TJ and I did that made Harry want to spend time on us is be good friends to him as well. Like we knew when to bother him and when to not bother him. We would do things for him. If he asked us to show up to a dinner or something like that, we would do it. If he asked me to do work, legal work, I would do it. Being someone where understanding that it's really a two-way street. And so really the reason why that relationship lasted decades is because we became very close friends, basically family. So that's not always going to happen with every mentor-mentee relationship. But I think one thing that was really key to that was me being a good mentee. And that matters a lot as well. I think sometimes I see a lot of young people come up and they're like, well, okay, mentor me. Like I need mentorship. But it's like, all relationships are a two-way street, right? So I think that's something a lot of folks could work on and think about.
I love that. Yes, I love this emphasis on relationships. Unwittingly, this is where it started and is this through line is continuing even when we're talking about law. So I also want to point out that I think this is the most airtime Misasha's husband has ever gotten on this podcast.
And I'm sure he'd love every second about it.
Oh, he's loving it.
He would
yeah,
love every second
loves it.
But I heard he said, what are you talking to Luke for? So this is every part of it.
When you mentioned that stuff about, you did the extra work, I think, reading up on the body of work that you've done is incredible. I think the work that you do at Wilson Sonsini is cool, not only because it's needed, but, true to the podcast Misasha and I talk about, I think it really touches on a lot of the systems that are holding people back, and it actively is working to change them. So I wondered if you could, this is where my non-lawyer part comes in, right? Like explain what pro bono work and impact litigation is. Maybe contextualize that, because this is at a major law firm. Like, does your position exist at other major law firms? And then can you share some of the cases that have meant the most to you?
Yeah, for sure. And all great questions. And I'll start with just pro bono and then kind of like some case examples and then some of the other questions around the position and that sort of thing. So pro bono work is essentially the practice of law where you're doing it for the public good. That's essentially what it means. It's not for money. We don't get paid for that aspect of our work at all. And so that's what I think also makes it really rewarding is it's really intended to provide access to justice and access to the legal system for the underserved. So I'll give a couple examples of how that looks now and then some of my formative ones. So a lot of the pro bono work we do now today at Wilson is focused on transactional work. So we will do clinics for small business owners. So for example, women-led small businesses with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of San Francisco will do clinics to help them get their businesses up and running or deal with their legal issues and really look to help them build generational wealth. And then another example would be immigration. So our firm has 160 plus active immigration cases. So it's everything from asylum to working with trafficking survivors to really working with people who are in a very vulnerable positions who we believe should have viable paths to status in the US. And then there's things such as impact litigation, like you mentioned, where it's really intended to not only help individual clients, but create systemic change, as you mentioned. So I'm going to talk more about past cases than current ones. But an example of that would be we represented a class of Medicare beneficiaries against the federal government in a class action. And that's a class action is essentially when you're representing potentially hundreds of thousands of people who are in a similar situation who are all facing the same alleged discrimination. In this case, it was Medicare patients who were told, hey, Medicare is not going to cover your hospital stay because of X technicality. And in our view, that wasn't a valid reason to be denying care. And the incentive was to save money on Medicare when these people should be covering it had disastrous impacts. So we litigated that case across three presidential administrations before we went to trial. And then we won at trial and then we won on appeal. And I think what that case really symbolizes is that these folks would never have had access to the legal system absent a firm like ours taking that on pro bono because it costs millions of dollars that we're never going to see again to do that. And so many thousands of hours of attorneys and staff to do. But we were able to enact a change that now, hey, people who should be getting covered for their severe care that they need throughout their life are. And so it's like a way to make serious impact. And then there's impact litigation like that. Right now, we do have a current case where we represent Black farmers against the federal government, and we allege that the USDA discriminates in the provision of loans that are vital for farming. Farming is a very resource and monetarily intensive endeavor. And what we are trying to see is all farmers being treated equal, which we think they're really not at this time. And it's really a rough go for farmers all around. So those are two examples. There's many others, but essentially pro bono is for the public good. It's really trying to help people when they need it.
I was hoping you were going to talk about the farmers because the farmers is kind of my favorite. And especially just in terms of, and I've seen some of the quotes that you've given about just the systemic nature of the discrimination against Black farmers. And how that plays out in this case.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite aspects of that case is our clients, Angie and June Provost, and I'd encourage everyone to look them up and see they've been featured in the New York Times and others. They're just wonderful people, and they have all sorts of endeavors, but they're fourth generation sugarcane farmers in Louisiana, and their family has been at it for so many years, and they're such wonderful, talented farmers and wonderful people. And again, this is an active case, so it's all allegations, but we allege is that very systemically and methodically, they've been discriminated against over and over and just facing barriers that they shouldn't have to. And I think their situation also reflects a larger one is that we really, in this country, in my opinion, have not treated our farmers well, regardless of background. And one thing that we've been learning is that discrimination isn't just limited to Black farmers, it's farmers of color, it's women. And really, in these days, there's not a lot of farmers who have an easy go of it. I think it's really been a profession that we've neglected in recent years. And so we're hoping that we can shine a spotlight on this because I think what every farmer would agree on, and when we go out there and talk to them, we hear this, is that they all just want an equal shot to go and get their crops out and feed this country and the world. And I think that is part of our goal here.
You gave us a little bit of your background. But I'd love to hear from you more directly. Like, what lights you up about being able to lead this part of the law world?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. So for me, I feel a deep sense of gratitude to be where I am. Like I wasn't supposed to. Like, when I think about different instances in my life and things that have happened or just my background, just being able to have the opportunity to practice law and be a lawyer is amazing. And even being able to work with some of the clients that I have in the past, like Netflix, Google, and others has just been so cool and just such an amazing privilege. With pro bono, I think it started Harry, who we talked about, really instilled in me like the need and the joy and the privilege it is to give back to other people and seeing what they go through. But I think there was also a really early pro bono client who really kind of, in your words, lit me up and really kind of flipped the switch for me. And that was in a situation where I was a very junior attorney still. And kind of as Masasha alluded to, and maybe obvious, I was really first gen. And so in the lawyer context, that's like no one in your family has been a lawyer before. I was super unsophisticated. I still am, by the way. But I just really was at a point where, they assigned an assistant, an administrative professional to work with me. I was too shy to talk to her for like 6 months. I didn't know what to ask her to help me with or whatnot. And I know that seems really hard to believe for some now, but it was true. And so I didn't really know what being a lawyer meant, but I had this client, this immigration client, and I took her on essentially on my own. And so what I learned from that is, she was really shy at the time too, unsure, and you think about it, you're in this country, you were essentially tricked into coming here by her, by an abusive spouse. You have no one, you have no family. You don't know who you can trust. You don't know if you can trust law enforcement. You don't, there's a lot of people who are telling you you shouldn't be here. She survived severe, severe domestic violence. And I think as we kind of worked together and built a trust, I was really inspired by her courage, really, to pursue this relief, to tell her story, to hold her accuser, her abuser to account, and kind of learned as I went. And I think we kind of grew together through that. So ultimately, we were able to get her a U visa, which is a form of immigration relief where you've been a survivor of a violent crime. Typically, you can get a visa and get a pathway to status through that. And then ultimately she got naturalized status years later. And just seeing the confidence build in her and the changes in her, I think there was no going back for me at that time. And then shortly after that, I started getting involved in some of the impact litigation that we talked about, similar cases to the Medicare. And I saw not only is it such an amazing feeling to be able to impact somebody's life in a way that maybe there wouldn't be help for them otherwise, or I didn't maybe need to do it. It's such an amazing feeling. And then it's also such a great way to build your legal skills. So I was getting to do all these things that stereotypically young lawyers at big law firms might not be able to do. And that's one of the things I really focus on now, is trying to get similar experiences for young lawyers in my position that I'm in.
I love that. I think, when I think about my time in big firm life, it was always the pro bono cases, I think, where that stuck with me or that taught me the most in certain ways, because big clients are one thing, but when you are really dealing with someone's life on that level, it is impactful in a way that it's hard to describe. So I'm so glad you shared that. I'm going to ask this question for all of the non-attorney listeners out there, because I think, pro bono is such an important part of lawyer life. And I think that absolutely everyone should be doing pro bono. We need it now, possibly more than ever, although it's always needed. But for those listeners who are not attorneys and so therefore can't do pro bono legal work, how do you think each of us, right, can kind of think about getting involved and giving back and lifting up those who need our help?
Yeah, and it's such a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because there's so many ways. And one of the things I think that you touched on a little bit is a lot of people feel like, hey, there's a lot of things going on in the world. It feels really heavy. What difference can I make? And the answer is a lot. And I think there's so much need in every community. And so one of the things that is really important to me about our program is we don't even call it a pro bono program. It's a community impact program. So it involves our firm's foundation, the Wilson Sonsini Foundation, but it also involves community service. So across the firm, we do an average of a community service project about once every 3 days. And so that could be things like working at food banks and working to clean up the environment and in our Save the Bay days. We do work at schools where we go and paint daycares and paint murals at schools and work with kids. We do kind of career days. One of the organizations we've worked with is a network for teaching entrepreneurs, where they'll have high school kids who are really learning about like what the world is and what careers might be open to them come. And they're not hearing just from attorneys, they're hearing from all of our folks equally. And so I think volunteering, in Redwood City, there's the Dominique Hoskins Black History Museum, who's a pro bono client of ours, where people can go down there and volunteer with Carolyn Hoskins, and I guarantee your day will be better for it. There are endless ways, and a lot of these organizations, even the legally adjacent ones that we work with, definitely need non-attorney volunteers. And I'm telling you, like, people who go out there and spend a day just in the community, just helping folks, will feel better about it, and you'll also make a tremendous difference. So that's one of the things I think we all have that superpower in us, is just taking a few hours out of a day and connecting and volunteering in what kind of drives you, what you're passionate about, is one way we can all make a huge difference in our communities.
I'm glad you shared that because it is such a local thing. I think there's a lot of power in doing work locally. And I love that Wilson has, when you talk about those community service days, it's everyone at the firm who's eligible. It's not just attorneys, it's staff. And so this, the concept of giving back to your own community, making that difference in your own community and spending a day where, matters most, possibly. Because I think when people think about volunteering, and Sarah and I talk about this a lot, or, getting out there, it doesn't have to be the national level. It doesn't even have to be the state level. The local impact is so, so important, and so underrated, I think, in a lot of ways. So I want to.
Can I add it's super fun? My favorite is we will do a few times a year playhouse builds usually for families of service members and that sort of thing. And so we go and build playhouses and paint them and things like that. And the families are always so joyful. But there's so many more, like working with Ronald McDonald House and building care packages for the kids who are staying at the Ronald McDonald House. Unfortunately, Ronald McDonald himself never shows up, which I've told that joke so many times, and people always are like, "Oh my God, why do you tell?" But I do think it would be kind of funny. But so many of those things are also a great way to build community within the firm or within your organization, or just feel connected. Because I feel like that's one thing that can often be very missing in our modern world is just in-person connection, and it just feels so great.
I was just talking to people about, sort of how we've lost that connection and how we are so isolated. So I think that's a great point. I want to talk about one thing that I know you've been involved with in the community, because I think Sarah and I have also spent a lot of time talking about how education is really important and how we show up and, support our schools and universities, especially now. And so sort of that partnership with Stanford Law and the Center for Racial Justice and the Harry Bremon scholars, like I would love for you to talk a little bit about how that came to be, because I think that's also a unique way in a legal, non-legal sense of promoting education and looking at, issues that really matter for all of us.
Absolutely. And so for the Harry Bremon Fellowship, that started essentially folks at Stanford approached and who are also friends and close to Harry and inspired by his example and said, hey, we're thinking about this fellowship where we would have a couple law students every year work at the Center for Racial Justice, have an internship, work on different issues, and we would have it be named after Harry. And I thought it was such a wonderful idea. I'm an alum of Stanford anyways, and it was Professor Rick Banks and Huang Pham, who's also just a wonderful guy, fellow Oregon Duck as myself, also from Oregon, who runs a lot of their programming. And so we thought that was a way to not only honor Harry's legacy, but to keep it going. And I think all of that is so important. We're doing another project with Stanford Law School where we, Wilson Sonsini and another firm, are supporting first generation students when they're coming into law. So before they even start, they'll have programming here around the school about what to expect as a first gen, as a low income person coming to law school, which is something I really could have used when I came in. And so I'm really super excited about that. But then I also think, Sasha and Sarah, that it extends way before law school. So like the things with the network for teaching entrepreneurs and just getting in front of kids and letting them know, hey, you matter. And hey, there are pathways. And hey, there might be some people out that tell you, like, I remember very clearly in high school, like I said, I was a difficult kid and a PE teacher telling me, I'm looking forward to the day that I drive by McLaughlin, which is the road, and I see you digging ditches for a living or whatever. And I think about that now, and it hasn't happened yet. Maybe someday he'll drive by if he's still alive and see me out there, but it hasn't happened yet. And so I think a lot of kids hear things like that, or implicitly or explicitly, but that doesn't have to be the case. And there are people out there, when you show them that you believe in them and that when you spend some time with them, I think it's really rewarding for everybody.
Yeah, I think there's real power in, lifting others up and doing for others what you wish had been done for you, or, looking to give the support so that we can continue to make things better. And I think Sarah and I think a lot about how do we make things better for those who come after us. So, what you're talking about is so powerful in that way as well.
I mean, what else? I feel like we could probably keep mining your brain for a long time, but what haven't we asked that you would like to share with our listeners?
Really good question. I think it's like some of the things I think about, and I think this applies to lawyers, non-lawyers, everybody, is one of the things I really think is important is being good to yourself and allowing yourself and others grace. Because I think a lot of people feel a lot of stress in these times. They feel like they're kind of careening from one headline to another. What's the future going to look like? But I think if you take a step back and kind of think about some of these things, getting involved in your community, just doing things that bring you joy, it can bring a lot of good to the world, and it can be something as little as maybe someone flips you off in traffic. You don't have to flip them off back. Don't engage. Don't feed into a lot of this stuff that's going on out there. And understand that there is a lot of beauty and joy and that things turn, pendulums swing. Sometimes, I've heard people say, maybe it's a dark time, maybe it's things like that. It doesn't have to be that way. And what a joy and gift it is to be alive and have a chance to impact different things. And I know for me, I feel really, really grateful for that, but also grateful for all of the amazing people I get to meet, like you and Miss Sasha, who care and who want to see things better for future generations as well as ours. And so I think that's one thing I think sometimes gets lost is making sure to find the joy in everyday life and in each other. And that's one thing I think a lot of people, you know, a conception a lot of people have about like law firm life or big law life is it must be miserable, all lawyers are terrible, and that sort of thing. And I think lawyers jokes exist for a reason, and it can be that way, but it also doesn't have to be that way, and it's not always that way. Some of the most amazing people I've met have been at this firm. People like Masasha, people like Harry, TJ, and so many others I work with every day inspire me by how much they care and how much they want to give back. Really smart, wonderful people. And I think there's people all out there across this country and this world where that makes me think, hey, there's always an amazing chance for a wonderful tomorrow, but let's enjoy the wonderful things and all the great things about today as well. So I think that's one thing I would want to encourage people is like, it's okay to feel good and to feel happy, and that not everything can change at once. We can't all impact everything all the time, but we can make a difference in our community and in our own lives.
Well, thank you, first of all, for rehabilitating lawyers on this podcast. I have been trying to do that for a while, so it's always nice to hear it from someone else. But, I think that what you've shared with us today is a wonderful example of so many different things, but really the power in, caring and the power in doing. And so in a very thoughtful way, and also how legacy lives through others, right? Because I think you carry Harry's legacy, just like everyone who, kind of came into contact with him and was influenced by him as well.
No, thank you. I vastly appreciate it. And, he was such a special person and so many others as well. And I think that's one of the beauties of life is that when you do walk through life as Harry did, you make a really lasting impact that lasts longer than any of us as individuals do. So it's a really beautiful thing to me.
You've been listening to What Do You Mean by That? A show dedicated to being better humans and getting loud for all of us. Hat tip to Sarah's daughter for the logo, and huge thanks to Misasha's son for our incredible theme music. Find out more and subscribe to our newsletter at whatdoyoumeanbythat.com. Because as always, it's all of us or it's none of us.